should be considered a system. I think the word system and workflow can sort of be used interchangeably.
Yeah.
And we need to look at all the different things that we do in our business that we do repeatedly, and not only find ways to make them more consistent, but find ways to optimize them and to streamline them. Because I think most photographers, like you said, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, most photographers just get so overwhelmed when you get in the busyness of the season, whether it's springtime if you're a portrait photographer, or if it's summer if you're a wedding photographer, whatever it is, whatever season that you're in right now, it's so easy to become overwhelmed by that. And unless you've got refined systems and a really clear, refined workflow, you're going to find yourself back in that place.
Yeah, and I think the thing is you've got to let some things go as well. You got to get rid of the clutter.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Last night there's an example where one person told me, this other photographer and I are just getting a new studio, and we're going to be sharing the studio. We need, of course, to be on the same calendar for booking purposes and so forth. And I said, well, that shouldn't be difficult. And she goes, I just wish there was a way that we could, Mark, I'm like, well, are you not both on Google Calendar? And she's like, I don't like Google Calendar. All my personal stuff is on iCal. So she's trying to do two different calendars all the time. And I was like, okay, but that resistance to change is just inefficient.
Yeah.
So at some point you just have to make a decision, pick one, and just go with that.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to balance all these different things, just because that's the way you've always done it. Right? So sometimes you just have to make those hard decisions in order to get the efficiency to move forward.
Right.
So one of the things that I think is super important is understanding that you need to put everything in its place. Have a place for everything and put it in its place, and that helps you declutter things. Like, I think a lot of photographers probably spend more time, with so many different things they don't really use or need, and as a result, they kind of clutter up their lives, their studios, their business with all kinds of unnecessaries. I think you really want to just start to take a hard look at your business and say, what do I actually really use?
Right.
What am I best at? And what do I have that I don't need?
Right.
Trim the fat, get rid of stuff you don't need.
Right.
And then, first of all, that usually lifts a huge weight off you. You suddenly realize, oh wow, I don't need all this other stuff. I don't need to maintain it. I don't need to think about it. I only need to focus on what works.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really good sort of formative step.
I think like, as it relates to workflow, that sort of like obsessive tinkering that we like to do as photographers, which I think a lot of us are like that, where it's new app, new tool, new light, new this, new that. We sort of want to get in there and play with it and toy with it.
Yeah.
The problem is that you're in doing so, you're doing the opposite of what the workflow should be doing for you, right? Like, the whole point of a workflow is to have a streamlined process, to be consistent, to be reliable, to be repeatable, so that you can kind of do things almost habitually, right? Or like almost as a routine. But by constantly tinkering and adapting new things and trying new things and buying new gadgets and whatever, the clutter is one side of it, but the other side of it is it makes for an inconsistent workflow.
For sure.
So you're kind of never really doing anything in any streamline.
Well, if you go back to the example that you already mentioned, which is like the editing workflow, once people get their editing workflow down, they rarely want to leave that.
Right.
Like, they don't change it and say, oh, you know what, I think instead of using Lightroom, I'm going to now do Capture One Pro, or something like that. They're not going to go jumping back and forth and saying, well, maybe this one's better, maybe that's one. Once you feel comfortable in it, you stay with it.
Right.
And that becomes efficient in itself, because the more you practice at it, the faster you get at it.
Right. Yeah.
Therefore, the more efficient you are.
Yeah.
So unless something revolutionary comes along that everyone is sort of saying, hey, you really need to try this. And, and there's nothing wrong with experimenting.
Sure.
But you should plan time to do that.
Right.
That's not in the midst of your regular workflow.
I think what it comes down to is, like, there's two sides of it, right? One is like the obsessive tinkerer that like never really has consistency because they're always playing with things, and the other is someone that gets so stuck in their ways that like they're still using paper filing, right? And they just resist change.
Yeah.
And I think that there's got to be a balance in there. I think that you have to almost give yourself like an audit period or a review, whether it's a quarterly or a semi-annually review, where it's like when you're give yourself a chance to work on your business. We talk about this all the time, being in CEO mode versus worker bee mode. Give yourself a chance to work on your business and sort of lay out these workflows, lay out these systems, lay out these processes, and then just stick with it. Kind of get